When Officer Bob Eichen showed up at the address of a reported kidnapping in Alton, Illinois on April 29, 1989, he had no idea what he was walking into. When the victims introduced themselves as Robert and Paula Sims, the names didn't immediately ring any bells. The panicking parents explained that a masked man with a gun had attacked Paula and taken their 6-week-old daughter Heather. It was a serious case, and Officer Eichen immediately called for backup so they could find the missing infant. It wasn't until Rob said, quote, "This happened to us before," that the officer realized who Robert and Paula Sims were. In 1986, their 12-day-old daughter Lorelei had been kidnapped and murdered by a masked man with a gun. 3 years later, they were claiming that exact same thing happened again. This is Monsters. Paula Blue was born on May 21, 1959 in Freeman, Missouri. She was the third and final child born to Orville and Nylene Blue. She had 2 older brothers, Dennis and Randy. Orville worked for Amoco Oil Company as a pipeliner, which meant he maintained and operated the oil pipelines. When the company began building a new pipeline in northern Missouri, a company transfer caused the family to move to La Plata when Paula was 7. Paula was described as quiet and shy in her youth, and people who knew her said she was a bit of a tomboy. She grew up spending more time playing sports and riding motorbikes. As she got older, she became more outgoing, especially when it came to standing up for herself. She would never back away from a fight with both boys and girls. When she got old enough to earn some extra money, she opted to mow lawns instead of babysit. People would later say that she didn't really have an interest in children, which would cause many discussions later in life after she was convicted. Paula had good relationships with both of her brothers. Her oldest brother Dennis had suffered from a bad case of measles when he was 3 years old that left him with a seizure disorder. His seizures were severe and frequent enough that he couldn't be left alone. Paula was protective of Dennis and spent time with him on walks and at the movies. Other students would make fun of him for having seizures because, that doesn't make you a cruel person, but as long as Paula was around, nobody teased him. By contrast, Randy, a few years younger than Dennis, was quite popular in school. He was well liked by his classmates and dated regularly. He and Paula would play basketball together, and she began gravitating towards his friend group. They would drink and smoke marijuana, and there were rumors of harder drugs, but nothing that was ever verified. One boyfriend would later tell the police that they did do LSD when they could get it, and Paula would occasionally steal some of Dennis's seizure medication, which can cause a calming effect. That boyfriend was a friend of Randy's, and one night Paula and Randy went out for a drive. It's been speculated that Randy was unhappy about Paula dating his friend, and he wanted to talk to her about the relationship. They were speeding down a road on the west side of the city when Randy lost control of the car, hit an oncoming car head-on, and then bounced off a tree. Randy's skull was crushed, and he died on the scene at 19. Paula was hospitalized with severe facial injuries. A toxicology report would find that Randy was intoxicated at the time of the accident. After the crash, Paula was never the same, which shouldn't be a surprise. Being severely injured in a car accident alone can change someone. Having lost your brother in that car accident too is emotionally damaging. A state trooper who had been on the scene of the accident would end up spreading a rumor that Paula and Randy had been in a sexual relationship. He told other people that another officer on the scene told him that he had once caught the siblings having sex in a parked car. That claim was never confirmed at the time, and after Paula's later crimes, the FBI would interview everyone who had worked in law enforcement in La Plata in 1975 and 1976, and not a single one of them claimed to have caught the siblings in the act. Paula became withdrawn and distant. She stopped playing basketball altogether. Her mother, Nylene, also took the loss hard, again understandably, and people said she began spending all of her time at Randy's grave. So, a month after Randy's death, the Blues moved to the area of Alton, Illinois, where Amoco had a refinery. They settled into an area called Cottage Hills, just north of Alton, and Paula finished her education at Civic Memorial High School. The few friends that Paula had in Illinois would say she was quiet and never fought or showed any signs of aggression. She still smoked pot occasionally, but never drank and didn't party. Paula's closest friend at the time, June Bland, said that she really wanted to have children, especially girls. That would be another curious detail later in Paula's life. That friend would also say that when the Queen song Lorelei came out, Paula said she was going to name her first daughter that. After graduating from high school in 1977, Paula and a friend both enrolled at Lewis and Clark Community College, planning to study computers, a pretty new and exciting field at the time. Unfortunately, neither of them completed the program, and Paula started working at a grocery store in town. She worked there for years, and her coworkers would not have fond memories of her. They said she was standoffish, and it seemed that her aggressive nature had returned. She had multiple confrontations with coworkers as well as customers. She remained pretty solitary and didn't date much until about 1980 when she met a man named Robert Sims, who went by Rob. Paula still spent time with June occasionally, and they often went to parties at June's cousin's house. One of the people that attended those parties was Rob. He had invited June's cousin to a concert and she couldn't go, so she suggested he ask Paula. He did, and she said yes. A year later, Rob asked Paula to marry him, and again, she said yes. They were married on May 2nd, 1981. Paula was 22 years old and Rob was 29. Robert Sims was born on April 20th, 1952 in Carbondale, Illinois, to Troy and Wilma Sims. He was the fourth of 5 children born to the couple. He had an older sister who was born prematurely and died within a day of her birth. He also had 2 older brothers and a younger sister. The family moved to Alton in 1958 when Troy became an elementary school teacher. Troy also taught music, and Rob played the tuba in marching band. Troy would later say that Rob lived a fairly sheltered life and was pretty average academically. He didn't go to college after high school, but instead became a debt collector for a local credit union. He did try to take some classes at Southern Illinois University, but dropped out and joined the military. He enlisted in the United States Navy in October of 1972 and spent most of his 3 years enlisted at a naval air station in Brunswick, Maine. He would later tell Paula that he was having nightmares about his time in Vietnam, but there's no record of him serving in any combat, especially not Vietnam, since the U.S. was pulling out of the conflict in March of 1973, which would have been around the time Rob was completing training, depending on his job. While in Maine, Rob met and married a young woman named Martha Smith, and when he left the Navy, she returned to Illinois with him. Except he didn't choose to not re-enlist. He was classified as ineligible for re-enlistment due to a negative attitude toward the Navy. He had no disciplinary record, but his superiors seemed to notice that he wasn't fit for duty. When Rob returned to Alton, he went back to his job as a debt collector. His coworkers said he was different after returning from the Navy. He was moody, and he clearly had a problem taking directions from a woman. Then, one coworker started experiencing harassing behavior at work and at home. In the office, her lunch would get vandalized, and then her car. Things escalated to her home being vandalized, and then she got a letter in the mail that contained a paper with a picture of a nude woman with her breasts and genitals cut out and ransom-style cut-out letters saying, quote, "This could happen to you." After receiving a number of hang-up calls, the phone company put a trap on her line, and after 2 more hang-up calls, they were traced to Rob's home phone. When the police went to the Sims home, Martha claimed that she had found the number with Rob's stuff and called it twice without saying anything. The case was closed, but Rob's employer let him go. He worked for another credit union for a short time before becoming a laborer at the paper mill. That wouldn't end his problematic behavior, though. His coworkers said that he complained constantly and filed baseless grievances with the company frequently. One coworker would describe Rob harassing a black woman who worked at the company by putting a cockroach and a used condom in her sandwich. Rob's father would later say that he believed his son was prejudiced against black people and that he had a temper, which likely caused more problems in his life. Rob and Martha's marriage didn't last, and Martha moved back to Maine, saying Rob was too domineering. They were divorced in 1978. After Rob and Paula were married, they lived in Alton for a few years. They bought a house in Alton, but after living there for less than 2 years, they ended up getting their money back because they complained that the house's condition had been misrepresented. After that, they bought a house in a rural area in the town of Brighton. It was about 15 miles or 24 kilometers north of Alton. After moving, Paula told her friends that since they had a house and were financially stable, despite Paula having been fired from the grocery store, they were ready to start a family. Now, outside of Paula having said she wanted girls when she was younger, it seemed that Rob wanted boys, and he was seen as someone who made sure he got what he wanted. It was always believed that he had coerced his first wife Martha into taking the rap for him when he was caught harassing the coworker. Paula had become good friends with her neighbor Minnie Gray, who lived next door with her husband Don. They had 2 grown sons, and neither Minnie or Paula worked, so they would regularly hang out during the days and chat. Minnie was one of the first people Paula told when she was pregnant. After Lorelai was born on June 5, 1986, Minnie visited the newborn the following day. She said that Paula seemed extremely happy with her new daughter. On June 17th, 12 days after Lorelai was born, at just before 10:30 p.m., Dawn and Minnie were getting ready to go to bed when a woman started yelling outside of their front door. Minnie peeked out the window and saw her neighbor Paula frantically begging to be let into their house. Minnie opened the door and a hysterical Paula ran in and started yelling, quote, help me, they stole my baby, they stole my baby." Paula hysterically told the Grays that she was watching television in the basement living room when a masked man came in, pointed a gun at her, and ordered her to lay on the floor for 10 minutes. She did as she was told, thinking the man was going to ransack the house and steal valuables. But when she heard him leave, she got up to see that the baby was missing from her bassinet. She explained that she had run outside where she could hear footsteps running down the long gravel driveway, and she gave chase, but when she got to the road, the man was gone. When Don entered the room, he would later say that Paula was clearly upset, but there was no sign that she had been crying. He went to the phone to call the sheriff's department, and at the same time, Paula said she needed to call Rob. Rob did shift work at the paper mill and had been working night shifts at the time. Paula said she didn't have the number on her, so she ran outside back toward her house. Minnie chased after her, wanting to make sure her friend was okay. By the time Minnie threw on some jeans and made it to the front door of the Sims house, Paula was already on the phone with Rob. He told her he would come home right away. When Paula hung up, the women discussed how the intruder might have gotten into the home, and that's when Minnie saw a cut in the screen door to the front of the house. Paula said she had locked the screen door, but someone had made a cut in the screen just big enough to reach in and unlock it. The call from Don came into the sheriff's station at 10:27 p.m. When he hung up the phone, he grabbed a flashlight and stood at the end of the Sims driveway to signal to the approaching authorities. Deputy John Hazelwood called the Brighton Police Department and radioed the Illinois State Police with information of the kidnapping so they could prepare a bulletin. The deputy arrived at the house just after Brighton police officer Chris White, and not long after that, the sheriff, Frank Yoakum, also arrived on the scene. Children being kidnapped by strangers is a rarity in the U.S., and infant stranger abductions are even less common. But it happens, and the authorities have to take every report seriously. Because of that, Sheriff Yoakum called in help from the State Police's Division of Criminal Investigation, or DCI. They would be able to send them more investigators and even a canine unit to help search for the missing infant. Still, there were a lot of red flags about the case right off the bat. Minnie would later say that she was surprised that the intruder was able to get into the house and all the way down the stairs without the Sims dog noticing. Paula had once told Minnie that their large collie named Shadow would hear any little noise and always notified her when someone was approaching the house. When Minnie asked her where Shadow had been during the kidnapping, Paula shrugged it off and said she must have been in one of the other rooms in the basement. When the bassinet that Lorelei was supposedly in when she was taken was inspected, inside there was a blanket folded up, which seemed out of place. Why would somebody take the baby, then fold up the blanket and leave it in the bassinet? As a matter of fact, outside of the cut in the screen door, nothing was out of place. The intruder went straight to the baby and took her, somehow knowing exactly where she'd be. Another noticeable detail about the house was the fact that the hinges on the screen door made a very loud squeak when you opened and closed it. As investigators, crime scene techs, and photographers repeatedly came in and out of the house, the screeching sound from the screen door was grating to DCI Captain Kosis. He asked the sheriff to go and try to open the screen door quietly, but he couldn't. No matter how slow he pulled the screen door open, the screeching sound was clearly audible in the basement living room. How had Paula possibly not heard that? Or the hyper-vigilant dog for that matter? When Rob showed up, he ran from the car and asked Paula what had happened. The sheriff noticed that, while Paula was telling him that their infant daughter had been taken by an intruder, he didn't hug her or comfort her in any way. Then Paula said, quote, "I'm so sorry I disappointed you." When Rob denied he was disappointed, Paula replied, quote, "Yes, I did. You were disappointed when Lorelei was a girl, and I disappointed you because I didn't stop the man from taking her." When Robert noticed that people were listening, he leaned over and whispered something in Paula's ear. She stopped talking after that. Shortly after midnight, the state's police canine unit arrived on the scene with the captain of that area's DCI, Philip Kosis. Since it had been a few hours since the initial report, investigators hoped that Paula had calmed down enough to remember more details. They were wrong. She had no more answers than she had had immediately after the abduction happened. She said she didn't see or hear anything that could help them identify the intruder. Rob made some suggestions. He described a man sitting in a light blue Ford Falcon parked near the pond beside their house when he left for work earlier that evening. He said he stopped and told the man he couldn't fish in the pond. He said 3 days prior, a man in an old green pickup came to their door and asked about fishing in the pond, and when Rob told him he couldn't, the man got angry. So he returned 3 days later and kidnapped a baby? Seemed unlikely. He informed the investigators that a nurse at the hospital had said she was going to kidnap Lorelei, but then admitted he did believe she was joking. Then he said they had been getting hang-up calls since they returned from the hospital with the baby. If that was true, it would be a strange bit of irony. Rob also gave Captain Kosis more information about their past. He explained that he had an ex-wife in Maine who he hadn't spoken to since the divorce. He described his job and that he had been in some confrontations there. They were nothing the investigators saw as a motive for a kidnapping. Then Rob told Kosis about his workshop and the woodworking projects he had going on. The investigator would later say he was put off by the amount of attention Rob put into talking about his workshop, far more than he seemed to have about finding his daughter. The investigator said his conversation with Rob about the kidnapping made it seem almost like the man was bored. By the time the Sims had been re-interviewed, the canine units had come up empty, finding any trail leading away from the house. There was no sign that anybody had left the home in any direction. The baby had simply disappeared into the night. The next day, authorities brought in a boat and divers to search the pond next to the Sims' house. It was about 450 feet or 140 meters long and about 200 feet or 60 meters wide. It was about 50 feet or 15 meters to the east of their house. After hours of searching, nothing was found in the water. Dogs were also brought back in and were unsuccessful again, and a plane flew circles over the area around the house with an infrared camera in the hopes that the baby was still alive somewhere nearby, but again, they found nothing. One of the red flags that an investigator noted was when he saw Paula watching the divers in the pond. He told her she should go to the sheriff's station and make a formal statement, and she told him no. She said, quote, "I want to be here when they bring her body up." She must have noticed a shocked look on the investigator's face because she corrected herself and said, quote, "I mean, my baby is still alive, and I want to be here when they bring her onto the porch." That detective said he was so concerned about the statement that he made sure to immediately make note of it and inform the investigators in charge. Detectives went to Alton Memorial Hospital and interviewed all of the staff that was working in the maternity ward while Paula was there. Most of them said that everything seemed normal. The doctor said the birth went well with no complications. A couple of nurses said they noticed Rob seemed overly concerned with the birth certificate and said he seemed to scrutinize it quite a bit. One nurse admitted that she had said she wanted to take the baby home, explaining it was because she was so cute, but she did not say she was going to kidnap the baby. Detectives also interviewed a woman who shared a recovery room with Paula, and she explained that she had woken up to the sound of Paula crying on the other side of the curtain. She said she could hear her on the phone with Rob apologizing for having a girl. Investigators were not finding any direct evidence that Paula and Rob were involved in their daughter's disappearance, but too many things were just turning out to be strange. Paula finally went to the sheriff's station at almost noon the day after Lorelei was kidnapped to make her statement. She told her story again while a detective wrote it all down. The investigators continued to suggest that she knew more than she was saying, but she would not budge. Her statement read, quote, "I went downstairs around 10 p.m. with the baby to watch the television news. I usually watch the 10 o'clock news on Channel 2. I had fed the baby and she was asleep in the bassinet near the foot of the stairs. I was sitting in my easy chair near the baby. I think the weather was on. The next thing I know, I saw a man on the steps. I didn't hear a thing. The man was white, wearing a dark ski mask pulled over his head. It had eye and mouth holes. His shirt was a dark t-shirt. He was wearing gloves and had a handgun. He stuck his arm out, pointed the gun at me and said, 'Get on the floor, stay there 10 minutes or I'll kill you.' I laid down on the floor. My head was pointed toward the back door away from the baby. I thought, what is he doing here? The door is locked. He had a gun in his right hand. I didn't recognize the voice. It didn't appear too young or too old. The man didn't say a word after that. I didn't hear a thing, not even the baby crying. I heard the front screen door close. I got up right away, started running up the stairs, and as I passed the bassinet, I noticed she, the baby, was gone. I ran out of the door after the man. I couldn't see him, a car, or anything. I could hear what I thought was someone running on the driveway gravel as I was running toward the main road. I ran all the way to the end of the lane. I thought I would see a car or something, but didn't. I then ran to my neighbor's, the Gray's house, to have them call the police. I was going to have them call my husband at work, but didn't have his number, so I went back to our house to get the number. That was her entire statement. Without any more information to go on, the detectives asked if both she and Rob would take a polygraph test, and they both agreed. Now, before you blow up my comments explaining how polygraph tests are bullshit, I know. I am not now, nor have I ever suggested that they are legitimate, but they're part of this story. So I'm going to recount Paul and Rob taking the test and repeat what the detective said about the results. That is not me endorsing polygraphs. It's me repeating the events of this case. I will remind everyone that polygraph tests are not admissible in court, and the reason is because they are not reliable. They do not identify when someone is lying. They can identify when a human being's heart rate, breathing, and perspiration changes. Those changes can happen when someone lies, but they can also happen for other reasons, and someone can lie without those changes happening. So, unreliable. They were taken more seriously in the past, such as the 80s when this case was happening. Ultimately, after the tests were administered, the detectives received news that both Paula and Rob had indicated they were being deceptive. When Paula was told the results, she simply said, quote, "I don't care, it was the truth." Rob was equally as unfazed by the results, also insisting he told the truth. Back at the Sims residence, authorities brought in dogs one more time to hit some areas that were harder to get to on the first search. There was a steep hill with dense brush around the backside of the house, and a canine unit set out to ensure the area was thoroughly searched. As that detective headed into the area, Rob, who was on the back porch, said, quote, "I wouldn't go down in those woods. They're full of poison ivy. I haven't been down there in years. If you go down there, I wouldn't stay very long." The statement struck the investigators in the area as very odd. Why would a father be so much more concerned with a cop getting poison ivy than finding his missing daughter? It would become even more suspicious when the dog entered the wooded area and almost immediately hit on a location at the base of a tree about 100 feet or 30 meters down the hill. The detective made his way down to the area, secured the dog, and looked into the brush where he found a tiny human skeleton. Lorelei's remains were found on June 24, 1986, just down the hill behind the Sims house, the complete opposite direction from the way Paula claimed the intruder had run. There was a small spot on the back of her head where a bit of skin and red hair remained. The notification to Paula and Rob was no less strange than any other moment in the investigation. They heard that the skeletal remains had been found and they had no questions. They didn't request to see their daughter, they just accepted the news. The skeletal remains were eventually confirmed to be those of Lorelei Sims. The summer heat had caused rapid decomposition, and it was impossible to determine a cause of death, but the coroner suggested suffocation. The day after the remains were found, the Sims hired an attorney, and the police were informed they were no longer welcome on the property. Later that day, Paula and Rob left the house and stayed with Paula's parents in Wood River, just south of Alton. The Sims put their house up for sale and only returned to remove their belongings. Despite the suspicion of every investigator who worked on the case being on Paula and Rob, there was no physical evidence the district attorney could use to file charges against them. The only thing that was discovered after the Sims moved was that a woman that worked at a Hallmark card shop had seen Paula with Lorelei in the store on June 14th, which contradicted the couple's claim that they had never taken the baby out of the home after they brought her home from the hospital. But forgetting a single trip to a greeting card store isn't enough to put anyone on trial for murder. The case went cold and the Sims moved on with their lives in a new house in Alton. At their new house, the Sims kept to themselves. They had a 5-foot-high chain-link fence built around their front yard. That would be about 1.5 meters and was taller than your standard fence. Most of the time, they're 4 feet or 1.25 meters. The other unusual feature was that there was no gate. It crossed over the path that led from the sidewalk to the front door and completely blocked it off, making entry only possible through the back door. They put up a wood privacy fence on one side of the house, installed a light over the back side of the house, covered the windows with blinds or reflective film, and installed a heavy steel storm door on the back door. On February 1st, 1988, Randall Troy Sims was born at the same hospital that his sister had been. He was named after Paula's late brother and Rob's father. Neighbors said that they never saw the boy outside. He didn't play at the park or even in his completely sealed front yard. His parents didn't take him out for walks. They kept him inside under lock and key, and it seemed that their vigilance paid off, because Randy remained safe and sound at home with his family. Then, on March 18, 1989, Paula gave birth to another child, a daughter they named Heather. A little more than a month later, that baby would also go missing, and Paula's story of what had happened would shock the community. At a little after 11 p.m. on April 29th, when Heather was 6 weeks old, a call came into the Alton police about a child abduction. The first officer to arrive on the scene was Bob Eichen, and he was met by Rob frantically telling him to set up roadblocks. Then Paula approached and said the same thing. He asked her a few times if he saw a vehicle and she said no, which made the request for roadblocks unusual. Then he asked if she saw the person who took her child and she said yes, but she didn't remember much. Someone took your baby and only minutes later you couldn't remember much? What she did remember was that it was a man wearing dark clothes, a mask, and carrying a gun. Sound familiar? Soon, a canine unit arrived and started searching around the house trying to pick up a scent. You probably aren't going to be surprised to learn that they couldn't find one. While that was happening, Officer Eichen was trying to get the full story from Paula. He would note that, despite the couple acting frantic, they didn't seem genuinely worried. Paula said that, at about 10:30 p.m., she had walked out the back door to take a bag of trash to the bin. She would later add that Heather had been experiencing diarrhea and she wanted to get the bag filled with smelly diapers out of the house before Rob returned home from his swing shift. As she stepped off of the porch, a man in a mask pointed a gun at her and told her to go back into the house. She did as instructed, but once inside he struck her on the back of the head. The next thing she knew, Rob was waking her up and it was 11:12 p.m. He had just returned home from work and found his wife laying on the floor near the back door. They realized that their baby Heather was missing from the bassinet in the dining room. When they ran upstairs to check on Randy, they found him sound asleep in his bed. I bet you're super surprised by that. The initial investigation was an exact copy of the first kidnapping. Paula could only give vague details, and to every other question she said, "I don't know." The officer paused the questioning until a senior officer arrived on the scene, but he noted that Paula looked at Rob and said, quote, "My son's all right. That's all that matters." I'm sorry, what? A second daughter has gone missing and could wind up dead, and all that matters is your son's all right? When Sergeant Terry Lane arrived, he asked to examine Paula for injuries, but even though she was supposedly hit hard enough to knock her out, there wasn't a single mark anywhere on her head. There were also no injuries to her hands or arms that might have come from a fall forward either. Before detectives even arrived, Rob called his sister and then the sergeant overheard him say he needed to call his lawyers. When detectives got to the scene, Rob was tasked with going over the story again, and it was immediately noticed that he seemed almost bored as he relayed the details, just like 3 years earlier. Almost every detail of the supposed kidnapping perfectly mirrored the kidnapping story of Lorelei. The bassinet was empty and it was perfectly made, with the blanket folded and hanging over the edge, as if there had not been a baby in it any time recently. The rest of the house was in perfect order, with nothing out of place. The assailant had come into the house, went straight to the baby, took her, and left. Nobody in the neighborhood had heard anything or seen a man or a vehicle in the area. One very noticeable detail of the house was that there were pictures of their son Randy all over the place, but not a single picture of either of their daughters. It was as if they had never existed. There was also no indication in the house that they even had a new baby. Randy's room was heavily decorated for a little boy, but the other room that should have been another child's bedroom was completely unused. It was not set up in any way to be a nursery, and it seemed that Heather just slept in the bassinet, which at the time of her kidnapping was sitting on the dining room table. A detective picked the trash bag out of the outside bin and took it back to the station. Once there, he found that the odor from the bag was not as strong as Paula had claimed. He also found that the bag was not filled with diapers. There were 15 diapers in the bag. 7 were the size that Randy wore, and 8 were the size Heather wore. Out of all the diapers, only 1 was soiled with diarrhea, and it was at the bottom of the bag. It was also noted that there were fewer smaller diapers than there should have been. A newborn should have gone through about twice as many diapers than a 15-month-old. The fact that there were fewer diapers than expected and that they were at the bottom of the bag indicated that Heather might not have been in the house for some time before she was reported missing. Paula was taken to the hospital so her quote-unquote injury could be documented. On the way, Paula told the detective escorting her that she knew this was going to happen because a neighbor had previously had her house broken into and that woman was tied up. Paula said then that she believed it must have been the same perpetrator. Detective McDooley informed her that they had already arrested the person responsible for that crime and it had been the woman's nephew. The detective said that Paula was shocked by the news and seemed deflated after hearing that. Then she started rubbing the back of her neck and moaning. By the time they got to the hospital, Paula was curled up in the fetal position in the back seat of the car. She was wheeled into an examination room in a wheelchair, and a nurse checked her for injuries and noted her range of motion and cognitive ability. Paula's vital signs were normal, she had a full range of motion, and she had no disorientation or confusion that usually followed a head injury that caused unconsciousness. The nurse noted some redness on the back of Paula's neck, which was likely caused by her rubbing it. It was also unusual for someone to be unconscious for 45 minutes after being knocked out by a head injury. A head injury causing a concussion can last up to 15 minutes. Anything longer than that is usually caused by moderate to severe traumatic brain injury, not from being whacked on the back of the neck by a hand as Paula had claimed. Detective Dooley told the doctor they needed an X-ray and a drug test for the investigation, and once those were complete, Paula was discharged. The detective noted that she hopped off the exam table and showed no sign of pain or injury after that. She also had not asked about Heather or the investigation at any point after they left her home. Paula was taken from the hospital to the police station where she was interviewed. Even though this case was in the neighboring county, Sheriff Yoakum showed up to the police station in Alton, as did DCI Captain Kosis. To nobody's surprise, Paula did not give any more details about the attacker. She had described the mask he was wearing as having eye holes and a decent-sized hole around the mouth, but when the investigators asked her what the man's skin color was, she backpedaled and said the holes weren't that big. They ensured they got her description of how the man had performed a karate chop to the back of her neck multiple times, so they had it well documented. Paula was driven home, and then Rob was brought to the station for an interview where he was equally unhelpful. Investigators searched wooded areas near the Sims house and they brought in dogs, but they had no luck finding the missing infant. On May 3, 1989, Charles Saunder arrived at a public access area on the other side of the Mississippi River in Missouri at about 7 p.m. He fished for about 30 minutes, and as he was headed back to his car, he went to put some trash in a bin outside by the bathrooms when he noticed a black garbage bag in the bin that just struck him as odd. The bag was tied in a knot at the opening, so he pulled out his pocket knife and cut the bag open. Inside was the naked body of an infant lying face up. Charles immediately found a phone so he could notify the police. Local police could only assume the remains were those of Heather Sims, so the investigators of that case were called out. After a positive identification at the scene and some jurisdictional bureaucracy, the case was handed over to the Alton police. Unlike Lorelei, Heather's remains were in almost perfect condition. The detective that made the identification said it looked like she had just died an hour before. He knew that wasn't the case, though, because the lividity of her body was wrong. Lividity refers to how the blood settles in a dead body, which is visible through the skin. You can tell which part of the body was facing down after death because blood will settle there, causing a purplish discolorization on the skin. It was clear that Heather had been face down for a decent amount of time before she was placed in the garbage bin. There was also a red mark on her cheek that was believed to have come from freezer burn. As the news of the discovery hit televisions throughout the area, Paula packed up and took Randy to her parents' house. Just as she had done in 1986, she would never return to the house in Alton. At least not to live there. The couple would end up eventually selling the house. The following day, Heather's autopsy was performed by a medical examiner in St. Charles County, Missouri. The autopsy revealed that the infant had been smothered, and it was confirmed that the body had been either refrigerated or frozen. Later that day, Rob and Paula were asked to come into the police station to talk about the discovery of their daughter's remains. While they were there, search warrants were carried out on both their house and the home of Paula's parents. At the Sims house, investigators collected 2 boxes that contained black garbage bags. They had collected garbage bags from the house previously, but they were white bags from the kitchen. These were larger black bags found in the basement that matched the bag that Heather's body was found in. They also collected 2 black bags of garbage from the side of the house. In the basement, they found a book called the Stash Book, which contained instructions on how to hide a number of things in your own home, including a body. At the Blues house, investigators found what looked like a blonde hair in their freezer, as well as a set of infant pajamas with bunnies on it, the exact thing Paula described Heather wearing when she was supposedly abducted. They collected a roll of black plastic garbage bags from there and a number of sets of shoes from both locations. At the police station, Paula and Rob showed up having been driven by a man named Herb Condrey. Herb and Paula waited in the lobby as Rob was taken to a room where he was interviewed by an FBI agent. Then Paula was brought to a separate room where she was supposed to be interviewed by 2 female detectives who she had never dealt with before. After only a few minutes of questioning, Paula stood up without a word and walked out of the room. She started walking around calling for Rob, but other detectives managed to get her back to the lobby where they told her she was free to leave. But Rob was talking to an agent and it was up to him if he wanted to continue or not. After that, Herb and Paula left the station without Rob. Rob talked freely to the FBI agent, insisting that everything he and his wife had said was true. It wasn't until Rob learned of the blonde hair and pajamas found at the Blues house that he started to change his story. He said that he was sure that Paula would have never hurt their children, but it was possible he was wrong. When asked how she could have killed Heather and then dumped the body days later without him knowing, he explained that Paula's parents had been out of town during the time Heather disappeared. He said she could have taken the body to her parents' house while he was at work and then moved the body across the river while he was asleep. When he was asked about the garbage bags at his house, Rob got defensive, explaining that his fingerprints could be on a garbage bag if it came from his house. Rob was adamant that he had nothing to do with the deaths of either of his daughters, and he told the investigators that he was going to go home and talk to Paula. He said he could get her to confess and that she would confirm that he had nothing to do with it. Yeah, like you got your first wife to take the blame for the harassing phone calls? The following day, Rob failed to bring Paula to confess as he had promised, and the media was notified that the Sims, as well as some of their family members, were the main suspects in the case. The next blow to the Sims came when authorities were ordered to take custody of Randy Sims as a safety precaution. Another piece of evidence came to the investigators when a woman who had shared a recovery room with Paula when Heather was born came into the station to make a statement. She said that they had been talking and Paula informed her that her first child had been kidnapped. The story she told was that she was taking out the trash when a man approached her with a gun and ordered her into the house. Once inside, he hit her on the head, causing her to lose consciousness. When she came to, her baby was gone. But that wasn't how Lorelai was kidnapped. It was how Heather would be kidnapped 6 weeks later. The story got even weirder when the woman explained that Paula had told her that Lorelai's body had been sent to a lab in Atlanta and never returned. Paula told her that she believed it wasn't really her daughter and that Lorelai was still alive. A strange thing to say, since the Sims had in fact buried Lorelai in a family grave at the Woodland Hill Cemetery, the same grave that Heather would be buried in. When detectives attempted to verify her story, the woman's mother said her daughter had told her about it the day after it happened. On July 5, 1989, Paula was indicted for the murder of Heather Sims. Paula had already been arrested twice, once for withholding evidence in the case of Lorelai's murder and the other for withholding evidence in the case of Heather's murder. Both times she had been released on bond paid by her father. This time, Paula was arrested and held without bond. After the initial hearings required in a murder trial, the prosecutor announced that they would be seeking the death penalty. From that point, the prosecutor worked to come up with a probable timeline for what happened to Heather's body. The hair found in the Blues freezer turned out to have been a carpet fiber, and the Blues had come home and used the freezer Sunday night, days before the body was found. What the prosecutor believed happened was that Paula smothered the baby and took her body to her parents' house Saturday evening while Rob was at work. Then the baby was reported missing and their house was searched, including the freezer in their kitchen and the one in their basement. Sunday morning, Rob had called the Blues to let them know that Heather had been kidnapped, and they said they would return from their trip then, which wasn't part of the plan. Shortly after, Rob was overheard telling Paula to go to her parents' house with Randy because there was nothing more she could do at home. It was strange because Paula had just been assaulted while alone with her children, and now it was suggested she go to her parents' house where she would be alone with her child. Wouldn't she feel more comfortable around other people? Of course, if the assault had actually happened. But it hadn't. Her parents were coming home early, so she needed to go retrieve Heather's body from their freezer and ended up putting it in their own freezer. The prosecutor checked every report from an officer that had gone back to the Sims house after that point, and none of them had done any further searches of the home. The medical examiner had given a wide window of when the body had been placed in the garbage bin, and there was a block of time within that window that Paula had no alibi. That timeline also meant that Heather's murder was timed to happen when the Blues were out of town, meaning it was premeditated. The FBI had matched the bag that the body had been found in at the manufacturing plant to having been made within 12 hours of the bags on the open roll found in the Sims house. At preliminary hearings regarding the custody of Randy, a detail that the prosecutor suggested as the motive to Heather's murder was presented. Not long after the baby's body had been found, Rob had been interviewed by an FBI agent, and he mentioned that he and Paula's marriage had been strained before the kidnapping. They had been sleeping in separate parts of the house, with himself and Randy sleeping upstairs in bedrooms, and Paula and Heather sleeping in a makeshift bedroom in the dining room downstairs. Rob told the agent that, after Heather went missing, they started sleeping in the same room again. Then he added that they had recently had the best and longest-lasting sex they had ever had. It was a bizarre thing to say during the investigation of the murder of your child, and the prosecutor claimed that that was Paula's motive to murder Heather. The baby was getting in the way of their relationship. Then an FBI expert testified about the comparison between the bags found in the Sims home and the bag Heather was found in. The manufacturing company was able to say they were made within 12 hours of each other, but the FBI analyzed the heat seal and perforation marks that leave specific microscopic markings due to dust buildup in the heat weld. He was able to say that the bags had been heat sealed within 10 seconds of each other. So the bag Heather had been found in had come directly off the roll that was still in their house. At the conclusion of that hearing, the judge determined that he did believe Paula was lying about what had happened to her two daughters. But she didn't believe that there was enough evidence to prove that Rob was involved, and since Paula was the danger and she was in jail, she granted Rob custody of Randy. Paula's trial began in January of 1990, and the trial went as expected. The prosecutor had presented the evidence from the scenes of both murders and had all of the witnesses testify who could back up the idea that Paula had murdered her own daughters, not that they had been kidnapped and killed. There was one surprise testimony, though. She was the medical examiner who had performed the autopsy on Heather, but her testimony was not only about the victim. It also included information about Paula. See, Dr. Mary Case was board certified in anatomical pathology, autopsy and surgical pathology, and neuropathology, the skill she was using for her testimony against Paula. Neuropathology is the study of the nervous system, brain, spinal cord, and muscles. She was testifying that Paula's story that she had been struck on the back of the neck was a lie. And the doctor explained that a blow to the back of the neck that caused 45 minutes of unconsciousness would have affected the brainstem in a very specific way. She explained that it takes time for a memory to become permanent, and that's why when you wake up from anesthesia after surgery, you generally have no memory of the 5 to 10 minutes before you were put out. It's called retrograde amnesia, and it's common during many head injuries. Being struck on the back of the neck as hard as Paula supposedly had would have caused the same effect, which was important because Paula claimed she remembered getting hit on the back of the neck, something that would have been impossible. Her brain would not have had time to record that memory before she fell unconscious. When Robert Sims testified for the defense, he confirmed that Paula couldn't have been struck the way she had claimed, though not willingly. He testified that he had come home from work on April 29, 1989, and found Paula lying on the floor. When he woke her up, she was immediately alert, had an understanding of time, and was aware of her surroundings, such as that Heather should have been in her bassinet in the dining room. The doctor had explained that would not have been possible with an injury to the back of the neck that caused 45 minutes of unconsciousness. No human being can be hit in the head hard enough to be knocked out for 45 minutes and then be completely alert immediately when they wake up. They would be extremely disoriented. Rob had also changed his story about where he and Paula had been during the time Paula had previously had no alibi. He became the first and only person who claimed that Paula was with him at a friend's house during the window of time authorities believed she had moved the baby to the garbage bin, which turned out to be less than 3 miles from their house. When Paula Sims testified, she put on an act and talked about the dolls and dresses she had saved from her childhood so she could give them to her own daughter someday. When her lawyer asked her about the events of June 17, 1986, she described the man who had ordered her to lay on the ground at gunpoint and then said something that stuck out. She said when she heard the man go out the front door, she got up and checked on Lorelei, but noticed she was gone. She claimed that she had even looked under the blanket in the bassinet, the same blanket that the neighbor Minnie Gray saw perfectly folded in the bassinet only minutes later. Paula claimed that she ran after the man and then went directly to her neighbor's house, so either she was lying about the kidnapping or she took the time to fold the blanket and put it back in the bassinet before running after the man who had just kidnapped her baby. Which one seems more likely? Paula also confirmed that she had definitely felt a blow to the back of her head during the alleged kidnap of Heather before being knocked unconscious, though she tried to shorten the time she was out, claiming it was possibly closer to 11 p.m. when the assault happened, a detail that had never come up before in the case. Then she claimed that she kept a few black garbage bags on the kitchen counter, which meant the kidnapper could have easily grabbed one. Well, what a convenient time to bring that detail up for the first time ever. Near the end of her testimony, she shocked the court by claiming she believed the man she saw during both kidnappings was the same man. That only made her story even more unbelievable. You have 3 kids and a stranger only kidnapped and murdered 2 of them, the girls, 3 years apart in different houses? No. In the U.S., a child being kidnapped by a stranger is already rare. Most kidnappings are carried out by someone the child knows. Then, out of all the child kidnappings, the victim being under 1 year old is also rare, so combining that makes the possibility of Paula's story being true pretty slim. One question that the prosecution had throughout most of the trial was why both Rob and Paula continued to deny that they had gone to the Hallmark store with Lorelei on June 14th, even when the owner told the police that she had seen the woman and baby there. When the prosecutor cross-examined Paula, he asked her about it again and she continued to deny that she had ever been there. But by then, the prosecutor had learned why they were so desperate to deny it. The prosecutor had interviewed the owner of the card shop, Gisela Rasp, and she said that Paula had definitely been in the shop that day and she had the baby wrapped in a blanket. Like many people do when they see a baby, she tried to get a closer look and take in all the new baby cuteness. Well, when Gisela took a peek at the baby, she said her eyes were half open and she was not moving at all. She said she thought it was strange at the time, but after finding out the baby was murdered, she believes the baby was dead when she was in the shop. When Paula left the shop, a man who fit Rob's description approached her and put his arm around her. The prosecutor believed that Lorelei had died on the 14th, which would explain why Paula would cancel her plans to visit her father, as that was Father's Day, and why the decomposition of the baby had been so advanced. He believed they wanted to have a witness that saw the baby on Saturday to give Rob an alibi and then have him be at work when the kidnapping was reported. For some reason, they changed their minds. The reason behind it would never be clear, but what was clear was that the Sims had lied. The defense tried to convince the jury that there was no evidence that showed that Paula Sims had killed either of her daughters, but the lies and holes in Paula's story were too much for the jury to accept. Paula Sims was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Heather Sims. She was also found guilty on 2 counts of obstructing justice and 1 count of concealment of a homicidal death. The next step in the trial was for the jury to decide whether or not Paula would be executed for her crime. After a short sentencing hearing and some statements from her family, the jury chose not to sentence Paula Sims to death. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Jurors would later say they were apprehensive about sentencing Paula to death because they weren't sure that Rob wasn't also involved in the murders. They didn't think it was right to execute her for a crime that someone else had also committed. There was some continued investigation into Rob, but it never went anywhere. He was never charged with any involvement in the murders of either of his daughters, and no charges were ever brought against Paula for Lorelei's murder. Despite that, many people find it very hard to believe that Rob was not involved in both murders. In July of 1990, Rob filed for divorce from Paula and had the word "Mom" removed from the family headstone over where Lorelei and Heather were buried. It had originally said, quote, "Together eternally in love, Mom and Dad." In 2015, Rob and Randy were on a church mission near Jackson, Mississippi, when their vehicle lost control, veered off an overpass, and crashed into the road below. They were both killed. They were buried in the family grave next to Lorelei and Heather. Not long after her conviction, Paula admitted that she had murdered both of her daughters, though the details about exactly what she said happened have not been released. She did say then that she committed the murders to please Rob, who was upset at having daughters instead of sons. In 2019, she tried to get a new trial, claiming postpartum psychosis caused her to murder her children. Her efforts to get a new trial were unsuccessful, but not because she was denied. In 2021, she was granted clemency from the governor of Illinois, which changed her sentence to life in prison with the possibility of parole. She was granted parole the same year. Experts have noted that the severe symptoms of postpartum psychosis that would cause a woman to murder her baby generally happen within the first 2 weeks after birth, but Heather was murdered 6 weeks after she was born. They also cause a break from reality, making it unlikely for her to plan out a murder ahead of time. Paula said she heard voices telling her to kill her children, something that never came up at any time in her case. It wasn't until she learned about postpartum depression and psychosis that she suddenly remembered hearing voices years earlier. Right. That story also didn't match the motive she gave when she confessed in 1990. Either way, Paula was released in 2021 at the age of 62. She currently lives in Alabama. There are so many questions about this case that will never be answered. Did Rob only want sons? How involved in the murders was he? Did postpartum psychosis play a part in the murders? Many people believe that Lorelei and Heather were murdered simply because they were girls and Paula wanted to please her husband. Despite it being hard to believe that Rob didn't at least know about the murders, Paula was the monster who took their lives, and she may be free, but at least she can't have any more children. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.